Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Cricket Badger. We're talking all things Azeem Rafiq at the Department of Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee here in the UK yesterday. All things Yorkshire, all things ECB, racism in cricket, and all of the what next, which, given the day that we had yesterday with everything that Azeem said and everything that we have all been thinking about, or those of us who've been paying any attention, could go on for hours, but we'll try and keep this to a tight 45 minutes where we really get into it. I'm Nakul Pande. I'm not the cricket badger, as you may have noticed. I'm taking a step into the host's role because it feels much more appropriate to have James, the cricket badger, as our expert for this week, given how close he has been to the story since it began and how close he has been to helping Azeem Rafiq. We're also joined by Neil Virani. The three of us were on a spaces that I hosted. Some of you might have joined that yesterday, and Neil had some good stuff to say there. So we've invited him along. James, the first question, I asked it last night, and I'm going to ask it again. How is Azeem?
I think he's absolutely knackered. Obviously, that took a lot out of him yesterday. I spoke to him very early this morning and basically set off on a tour of the London media establishments. I think today he's been on pretty much everything as he's gone through today. And I think the last thing he said to me this morning was, "I'm looking forward to getting home and having some sleep." I think so. I mean, we all know what when you kind of dreading, looking forward to, nervous about a big occasion, and then it kind of hits you and you go through it. Everybody's been in that kind of situation, and then you feel exhausted afterwards, and he's had to pick himself back up again to go again today. And I think he's looking forward to getting back home and sticking his feet up. But I mean, I was, Cricket Badger podcast listeners going back about 16 months or whatever it was now will remember the podcast we did with Azeem, and I've been talking to him pretty much daily ever since. And I was incredibly proud of him yesterday. I thought the way he conducted himself, the way he spoke, the way he answered the questions, the way what struck me and what didn't surprise me was the way that he. I basically said to him, just look them in the eyes and be honest, and that's all you need to do. You don't need, he didn't need notes yesterday. It just basically all came out of the heart and out of the head, and you could see how emotional and passionate he is as an individual. And I thought it was very, very compelling. And it was very strange, Nakul, for me, because I've, as I say, spoken to him regularly. The last 16 months condensed into an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever it ended up being, because it kind of went on quite a long time, didn't it? And it was quite it was quite a strange kind of sensation for me, because I massively proud of him, massively proud of where he's got to. And that's due to his fortitude and stubbornness and drive and refusal to give in, but also from a personal perspective. And I know he feels the same way. It's our club, Yorkshire's our club, and very sad that it's come to this. But in a way, I suppose the greater the pain now and the greater the coverage now, the more people have to listen, and hopefully that line in the sand or that watershed moment or whatever the phrase is that everybody's using is now. And because so many people are listening, and because it's got to the House of Commons, and because it's on every single newspaper and it's on every single TV outlet and the radio yesterday and today, and people are still talking about it tonight, hopefully it's had such a slap around everybody's face, or whatever the phrase would be, that people have just got to sit up and take note, and cricket has to take note. And people start to listen to people like Azeem Rafiq. They don't make it as hard for people like Azeem Rafiq. They don't dismiss people like Azeem Rafiq. They actually genuinely listen to what they've got to say, because if you do, this game can get fantastic, can't it? We are all cricket lovers, no matter what we look like, no matter what our sexuality, no matter what our sex. We are all cricket lovers, and we love this game of cricket. And we should all just sit in the stands side by side, clapping and enjoying life and enjoying cricket. All of this racism rubbish is just a waste of bloody time, isn't it?
As I said yesterday, and if it is on our spaces, I'm going to keep referring to, because we spoke for a couple of hours yesterday in the company of Atif Nawaz, who's a commentator on Test Match Special, and Tasneem Samar Khan, who is works in all sorts of things, but including cricket media and international law. It can seem like a phenomenally weird way to spend your time and your energy, but very evidently, from not just what Azeem Rafiq has said, but what from Zohaib Sharif, the former Essex academy player, from what Maurice Chambers has said, from what Michael Carberry has said, and we were talking just before we went on air about the Mark Butcher documentary, You Guys Are History, on Sky Sports, where Mark talks to a number of black English cricketers, that for many people it is a mindset and is integral to their sense of being, to exclude and to bully and to other. And while you can be shocked and appalled by what Azeem said, and by the content of what he said, the fact of it, I think you are being naive if you are surprised, and if you are made to feel uncomfortable. Good. Really, I think there's no other way to there's no way to sugarcoat that, and a lot of people are going to have some hard conversations with themselves. A few people who don't seem, Neil, to have been having hard conversations with themselves are some of the prominent figures that Azeem mentioned yesterday, and I'm conscious of taking Azeem's lead and not wanting to make this all about individuals, but we have seen not really apologies from the likes of Jack Brooks via Somerset, Tim Bresnan via Warwickshire, Alex Hales, Michael Vaughan twice. David Lloyd's actually was probably the best of them that came out yesterday. There are a lot of people who don't seem to have done any reflecting at all.
Yeah. Well, as Azeem said, and I fully agree, it's not about individuals. Individuals are a symptom. The institution which has allowed their actions is the real problem. But at the same time, there is still an issue with what the individual's actions have been. And there are two people who have been named who have come out of this with any modicum of credits. One is David Lloyd, who personally apologized both to Azeem and to James for the comments that he made. Now, this isn't a saying that it's all right now. What David had said was absolutely horrendous. It was a vast generalization, and it was indicative of the mindset which has led to the othering of South Asian players in Lancashire, Yorkshire, and other counties over the past 30 or 40 years. But it takes some level of man to actually admit that and to apologize to the people he's offended, rather than just putting out a load of bland platitudes to salvage their career. The other person is Matthew Hoggard, who contacted Azeem on the back of hearing how Azeem had been hurt, not on the basis of any threat to his earning potential. But I think that shows a level of empathy and contrition. So I think both of those deserve some credit for how they have acted in the aftermath of their previous actions.
I know, speaking to Azeem, he actually really appreciates that. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take away any element of accountability, because you still got to be responsible for those actions. But the fact that people have actually gone to him directly and looked him in the eyes effectively and said, "I'm sorry for what I've done," I think he actually really genuinely appreciates that. And he's accepted every single one of them. You know, he's not held any long-term grudges off the back of that. I think it's the people that have gone the other way, gone straight to lawyers and just either denied it or gone the other way, that he hasn't got as much time for.
And that phrasing you use, apologize for what they've done, not for the hurt that may have been caused or for any offence that may have been caused, but taking ownership of the actions, not not hiding behind the passive voice. This seems to come up this is not a new thing about how not to apologize and how to actually take responsibility, but it's always worth mentioning. But let's move on from the individuals to some of the consequences of this in the short and medium term. Yorkshire, of course, have already lost a chair, a CEO. Don't believe that. I think Martin Moxon is still in post, as far as I understand. The director of cricket, Les Neto, the HR director, some of whose messages have leaked recently, is still in post. And Azeem, I saw, was on the BBC today with Dan Rowan talking about a complete clear out needed at Yorkshire. And while of course, it's very easy for a club to throw at some individuals and try and say it's okay. We are well beyond the point, James. It seems to me that those people remaining in post is tenable or credible.
I don't think Martin Moxon can stay in post. I don't think Liz Neto can stay in post. Andrew Gale can stay in post. There's just been too much said about them. There's been too much that too much they've done, but too much they've not done in many cases. In actually taking this seriously. I mean, listening to the testimonies yesterday, it appears that Mark Arthur and Martin Moxon were the stumbling block in actually taking any responsibility, and it was all denials from them. And I just don't think that the club moving forward can have any real association with this period in its history, because it's been a really poor period in its history. I mean, the reputational damage to the club, it's as low as it's possibly been. When Azeem first sat in front of them he first reported bullying in 2017, sat in front of them in 2018, and they completely ignored him. There's a kind of like a little hole there, which could have been filled in quite quickly. They continue to dig, take wrong turns at every juncture. And now they're sitting at the bottom of the Grand Canyon wondering how the hell do we get out of this? And I don't think that for those individuals, I don't think there is any way out of this. And I think just purely on how the club looks moving forward, purely on whether you can get sponsors back in and they can trust you, purely on whether the South Asian population of Yorkshire, who must have lost a hell of a lot of trust with the club over the last week or so, if not 16 months, if they listen to the podcast, how you can actually get their trust back, because there's bridges that need to be built. And it's not a sticking plaster. This is you have to mean business by, you can't get out of this by telling a couple of porkies and then ticking a box and getting, moving on. You've got to do this properly, and you've got to mean it, and you've got to show you mean it. And I don't think you can show you mean it with those people in post.
While we're talking senior executives, Vin Talk Sports has asked what we think of Roger Hutton's evidence, and Vin says that they found something not right there, and that it came across as dishonest. Neil, you're shaking your head.
I disagree with that, because Hutton, to me, came across as someone who's well-meaning but completely ineffectual. The fact is that the CEO is in post at his behest. However, the entire structure there made it seem that Hutton was a lame duck, and he really came across that way during the interviews in front of the committee, and especially so when they invited Lord Patel to come and sit next to him.
The contrast was pretty stark. The contrast was pretty stark between Lord Patel and Roger Hutton. I have to say I agree with that. I thought that Roger Hutton came off as lacking any of the necessary personal charisma to be in that role. But I do think there was, and I don't think he was necessarily lying or trying to hide anything that he had done when he said that essentially everything he tried to do, he either didn't pursue it hard enough or was simply railroaded. Does that square, James, with yours and Azeem's recollection of how the last 16 months have gone in terms of Roger Hutton's role in all of this?
I don't know Roger personally, never met him, but he might be watching this because I know he follows me on Twitter. But I think he came into that club at a very difficult time. Pandemic. I mean, the kind of testimony he gave that he'd not met half the staff, or you wouldn't know them if you bumped into them in the street. It sounded quite funny, but it's not really, because the pandemic's caused all kinds of hassle. And we were talking prior to pressing record today about Zoom meetings when you've got 100 people on your screen. It's impossible to kind of build a relationship there, isn't it? So I had some sympathy with him, and I also had some sympathy with him from the point of view that if we're charitable, he was handed a gun with no bullets in. If we're uncharitable, he was handed a gun and took the bullets out himself. But either way, he didn't seem to have too much potency in that role, and he certainly had two people who were balking him at every single juncture. So I did feel sorry for him, and I agree with Neil that he was well-meaning. But I also think there was definitely inconsistencies with his suggestions that he had what he'd asked of the ECB and what the ECB understood he'd asked of the ECB seemed to certainly rile the DCMS committee, and they wanted further communication evidence of that.
That was a lovely opportunity, expertly seized upon by Julian Knight to play the hard man committee chair. And this will all come out, of course, because Tom Harrison was railroaded essentially found himself in a position where he had to agree to give up all of the evidence that was and all of the correspondence between himself and Roger Hutton, and potentially the ex-ECB chair Ian Watmore, regarding what actually was asked of the ECB. So there is more to come.
I think just one last point on Roger Hutton, though. I think from what I understand from a members forum that he gave and the evidence he gave yesterday, there were certainly differences in what he said, and that to me may be him having to represent the board in his official role, and now he's a loose cannon, he can say what he likes. But there seems to be some inconsistencies what he said down the months, so maybe that needs just ironing out a little bit to kind of get some kind of clarity on that, I guess.
You do wonder about how, and certainly this is true of the ECB delegation, with I think the exception of Mina Botros, the head of legal, and to a lesser extent Kate Miller, the head of communications and diversity, but certainly Tom Harrison looked unprepared for the hearing. They looked
like a bunch of 6-year-olds that had walked into school assembly without rehearsing, didn't they? They just hadn't really got their act together.
It does seem astonishing.
They looked like sixth formers. They looked like sixth formers who didn't think they needed to revise for the exam. I thought there was an arrogance to all four of them, and they felt it was beneath them to a certain extent.
I don't know if that would be the case. That certainly there was a lack of preparation. Evidently, Mark Arthur and Martin Moxon did think it was beneath them to actually turn up. We did touch a little bit on this earlier, and we talked in terms of there is a fine line, of course, between making it all about individuals and making it all about and not focusing on the wider issues, but also recognizing that there are some things from which the consequences are such that are significant. And somebody on Facebook asks, I don't know if you guys can put your names on these comments. It would be nice to put some faces to and names to usernames. Do you think
maybe
people like
Facebook user is a very nice name?
Facebook user asks, do you think people like Michael Vaughan and David Lloyd are now unemployable? I do think there is a difference between the two of them, incidentally, but
I do as well. And I think, I mean, my take on this in terms of people that have been guilty of offences in this area is that if you don't give people a second chance and a chance to clean their act up, for want of a better phrase, and be better and to learn from it and to maybe even influence other people and say, well, I've made that mistake, but I'm going to make it again. You end up with racists on one side of the fence, you end up with non-racists on the other side of the fence, and in 10 years' time, everybody's still the same. You haven't actually changed society at all. So I think you have to allow people to grow, but you do have to have accountability. And I also think it's very important what we said before about taking responsibility. Bumble's come out straight away, taking responsibility, said he's good. He understands what he said was wrong. He realised that was wrong a while back. He's now different. He's going to move forward and he's going to be positive and he's going to really embrace Yorkshire's opportunities moving forward. Michael Vaughan, whether he said what he said or not, whether he remembers what he said or not, obviously 3 members of the team suggested he did, but there is no kind of contrition there or any kind of acceptance of that it might have been hurtful or anything like that. I think Vaughan's language is wrong on this, and I would be uncomfortable with Michael Vaughan on TMS or wherever, moving forward, unless he actually came out and said something a little bit better than he said so far.
You talk about a second.
Ironically,
chance.
I think.
Sorry, you talk about a second chance. That second chance can't really be in the same place and with no change as the first chance.
No, and I think obviously Sky have got a decision to make with Bumble, BBC, etc. have got a decision to make with Michael. And there's other people involved in this as well. It extends further than that, doesn't it? Warwickshire are investigating Tim Bresnan's stuff, and I thought Prez's apology or statement was quite double-edged, and the phrasing of the second part of it in particular was a bit poor. Apologising unreservedly and then saying that you haven't done it is not quite the same, is it? I mean, I know it was bullying and then racism, but I thought the wording of that was quite poor. But I genuinely feel that if you don't allow people to learn from mistakes in this, you don't move forward at all. That doesn't mean you forgive them immediately. It doesn't mean they're not held responsible. It doesn't mean they're not accountable. But you've got to allow people to be better.
Yeah. We'll move on from that. But there is a difference.
You don't agree with that, Nakul, do you?
There is a difference. The one thing I will say, there is a difference between unemployable forever and whether it's tenable for them to continue in all of their current positions without any consequences. That's not quite the same thing.
I hate this cancel culture thing. I hate cancel culture, though. I just don't think people should be just cut off and thrown away and never heard of again.
I think we're at the other end of that spectrum.
I think Bumble, by showing contrition and actually coming across as more of a human being, is going to have more of an issue than Michael Vaughan, who's already got a gig with Fox and I assume the likes of GB News in today's culture would take him on in a heartbeat. I think the likes of BBC, it may get a bit too hot, especially if he's going to continue in this stance. But ironically, by taking a position, Vaughan has almost made himself more employable on one side of his own created culture war.
That's quite sad, Neil, isn't it?
Yeah, it's horrendous. But unfortunately, that's the world we're in now.
Just speaking of investigations, a statement was released by Somerset County Cricket Club, or no, let's use the active voice and practice what I preach. Somerset have released a statement. Late on Sunday evening, Somerset County Cricket Club was made aware of allegations regarding one of our players, Jack Brooks, which occurred while he was employed by Yorkshire County Cricket Club. An investigation was immediately launched and is ongoing. It would be inappropriate for the club to comment further until this process has been concluded. A further statement will be made in due course. What any of that means, who knows? But Somerset are investigating the comments of Jack Brooks, who Azeem credited or debited, I suppose, with starting the Steve Pujara nickname. Isn't really the right word. Renaming, I suppose, is the best way of putting that.
Pujara actually said that it was Jack Brooks as well on a clip that Cricinfo have circulated in. I certainly saw it again today. It was a couple of years old, and I know we've spoken quite a lot about this. This is the lighter edge of the racism that's been talked about throughout the whole Azeem Rafiq situation, but in a way it's all the more insidious due to that. It's not a brown guy getting chased down the street with people throwing bricks at his head, but it's the sort of thing that just eats away at you, dehumanizes and others you. The weird thing is, this is what happened in the 70s. This happened to my dad, to my uncles. Michael Mahendra was known as Bill and is still known that way. I think I shared on our group a Goodness Gracious Me sketch where a group of Indian people couldn't pronounce the name Jonathan, and it affected, complaining about it affected the guy's career prospects. It's that kind of little thing, microaggressions, which just eat away at a person slowly but surely. I quoted someone else who, unfortunately, I can't quite remember, because this falls into the banter region. And today I said, banter's like sex. It has to be between two people with respect and affection. Otherwise, it's just abuse. I think
the phrase you're looking for, Neil, is enthusiastic consent. I have a real problem with the word banter, incidentally, but we'll leave that. We'll leave that there. I'm a little hesitant to share this, but I'm going to anyway, from Facebook user who I suspect is not the same Facebook user as the other Facebook user. Hales denies calling his dog Kevin, which we're going to look back on as one of the strangest public statements in cricketing history that Alex Hales made today. Anyone who knows him will either confirm or deny that, which is a sentence I can't make head nor tail of. Vaughan denies saying too many of you lot. Why would Ajmal Shahzad say he didn't hear that? Surely if it was said, then the four guys would have spoken about it regularly. I would point that Facebook user in the direction of Osman Samuyuddin's piece in Cricinfo today, or yesterday rather, where he talks very well about how a racist culture can develop, and even the person or people at whom it's directed might not be aware of it. And James Azeem taught very well. I keep saying very well, as though he had to perform in some way. But he taught in a way that was completely unignorable about the drip, 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 drip realization, and how it actually didn't hit him until he went back the second time.
Well, I can really,
almost with something to compare it, almost with Derbyshire to compare it against.
I can really relate to that, because I suffered from mental health problems in the early 2000s. And there was nothing massive happened to me. It was basically a drip, 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 drip of things that were going on at work that basically I described as kind of just turning into a bit of a boulder and smashing me one day, and kind of woke up and didn't want to get out of bed. And so I can certainly see how that kind of affects you, where, some things aren't huge and you kind of think actually about individual things. You think, why am I worried about that? But then 10 individual things all mounted up, and then all of a sudden it's a big problem. And I can also see, because I worked at Yorkshire for 6 years, and I had no problem working with Yorkshire. It's inside the corridors of power. You don't walk around and hear the P word every single second. I never heard the P word in 6 years working at Yorkshire County Cricket Club, but I wouldn't, would I? And I probably wouldn't be looking out for it either. But it wasn't until I left the club and I started doing freelance work, and I worked for other county clubs, only in small capacities. I worked, and I also worked with Derbyshire for 10 days in the UAE, I think in 2014 actually. And I absolutely loved it. I was sat there one day about 4 days into this trip thinking, it's quite nice, isn't it? Everybody's really pleasant. Everybody's quite polite. People are actually talking to me and actually asking me about me. I don't think I ever spoke to a Yorkshire player. It was always about them. They never said, "Oh, how are you, James? What are you doing tonight? How's your family?" When I was with Derbyshire, that happened all the time. They were just like normal blokes, and you could just talk to them. And I got on with them. And I'm still in touch quite a lot of them now. Probably talk to more Derbyshire people than I do people that I work with at Yorkshire, and worked there for significantly longer. And it just woke me up to the fact that the culture there is so much more relaxed and pleasant and respectful. rather than the culture that I'd left at Yorkshire. And I think that just goes back to the culture thing. This isn't about individuals. Of course, individuals are going to have to hold their hands up and take responsibility, but this is about the culture in an organisation where, if you, I think personally, Yorkshire is institutionally racist, and certainly the last 3 years and how they've dealt with Azeem has been institutional racism, and that doesn't mean that everybody at the club is racist. The term institutional racism means that the actual kind of organisation and the culture is biased towards white people rather than people of colour.
It also means, as Azeem said a few times yesterday, Joe Root being the most obvious example, but others as well, that people who do not share those views did nothing to challenge them, or were able to not be affected by it, be able to go through their daily lives with having no effect, and have either a plausible deniability or to laugh along, to encourage, to certainly not do anything to challenge. And he said in his written testimony that he believes that the culture got a little better under Jason Gillespie, because Azeem believes that Jason Gillespie, the players who before and after were presiding over this toxic dressing room culture, thought that they would have been called out for it.
I work with Dizzy, and Dizzy's just Dizzy's a really simple bloke, in a nice way. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. He just basically, everything is just like it. We played at Chesterfield once, and I think Yorkshire had been bowled out for about 215, and the lads had come into the dressing room really disappointed, heads down and stuff. And then one of the guys told me later that Dizzy had just gone into the dressing room and said, they bowled us out for 250. You go out and bowl them out for 150. And that's basically his team talk. You're more than capable of getting yourselves back in this. I just wanted to ask you though, Nakul, go back to the comment about Ajmal, because I'm not targeting Ajmal with this, but I do know, the same way that I think people of colour have found it very difficult. I've spoken to people over the last 16 months who have told me there is no point in me complaining. I don't want to go through 3 years of hell. I've got a wife and kids, and it's going to be a nightmare. Or whatever their reason, I'm not going to get future employment opportunities, or I'm not going to get that coaching role or whatever. Ajmal's currently in the coaching staff at Derbyshire. I'm sure Ajmal probably wants to go back to Yorkshire. I'm not saying that's an issue. That's might be the reason, or it might not be the reason, or he might not have even heard it. Because just because you're running out onto the pitch together, it doesn't mean that you all hear the same thing, does it? Because there's noise around and everything like that. But obviously, 3 people are saying they did hear it. The fact that Ajmal didn't hear it, I think, is irrelevant. And to be honest, I think the fact that Adil added his name to that. He's an England player, and fair enough. So he's in terms of cricket stature, but he's still got the same number of ears as the other two. I think Azeem and Rana together should be strong enough for people. I don't see why you need Adil on top of that to suddenly think, well, that makes it better. It's
quite a revealing thing to say, isn't it? That you will only believe it when it comes from a player you've seen a lot on TV, or a player who's had a lot of success.
Or believe the one white man over the 3 brown men.
That there's a certain depressing rail politic to that, that might have some bearing to it. I'm going to go to another Facebook user. I think if you guys want to put your name on the end of your comments as though you're signing off a text message, you're signing off something without caller ID or something, because I don't think we can actually see your names. If you want to remain anonymous, that's absolutely fine, obviously. But if you do feel comfortable letting your name, just put your name on the end of the comment. This person asks what we thought of what the ECB said yesterday. I think Mark Arthur and Martin Moxon should have been there, 100%. It's important to note that yesterday's was not an inquiry. It was specifically listed as a non-inquiry session of the DCMS Select Committee, and so they didn't have any powers to compel anybody.
On Martin though, Knuckle, I just think it's worth just pointing out that he is off sick. So if that is,
that's right, he's on leave because of officially quoted stress.
I think it looks very poor on the cricket club and the executive at the cricket club. Mark Arthur's obviously not off sick; he's now left the post. But from what I'm hearing, they're saying they've done nothing wrong. But if you've done nothing wrong, go and sit in that chair and tell us why you've done nothing wrong.
I thought that about Michael Vaughan in terms of speaking to the investigation as well, when he pulled out of speaking to them because he'd heard of the allegation. A person who has nothing to fear should not have an issue with going out there and saying it.
No, I agree with that.
And this person, thank you very much for sharing this. You absolutely don't have to share your trauma, but if you feel capable of doing so, we're very much a safe space for that. I was subjected to racism at secondary school for 5 years. I was called the P word. I am half Iranian. I'm very sorry that happened to you. That's appalling. And that comment, by the way, is from Lily. Thank you, Lily, for sharing that.
On the ECB thing at the start of that, Knuckle, I thought the ECB actually probably came out a bit worse than Yorkshire yesterday because everybody already had low opinions of Yorkshire. So the bar was fairly low to start with. The ECB, the Horlicks they made of it, and some of their kind of regulatory protocols in terms of the fact they've got an independent regulator committee or regulatory committee, which they appointed and presumably pay and presumably hire and fire. You know, they're basically at the beck and call. They're effectively members of staff without that title, aren't they? So they're not independent at all on that basis.
No, and that was very, very similar. And I'm sure this happens at lots of clubs and lots of institutions, by the way, that there is this happens at government level where there's appointment of regulatory bodies, and it's happened, and of course it happened at Yorkshire, where Yorkshire were able to Roger Hutton was able to name a law firm that he used to be a partner at.
I thought it was quite funny yesterday because we need to laugh sometimes in this because otherwise it's just desperate, isn't it? But when the MP says we're probably not the right people to talk about regulatory bodies at the moment because they're going through their own kind of traumas, aren't they?
That was yes, there was some very ill-judged attempts at humour yesterday, and that very much reminded me of sort of Frank Lampard's little jokes in the middle of an answer to a very serious question, where he then or it's serious joke about seriously serious. That wasn't the moment. I don't think. But there are serious questions, Neil, for the ECB to answer in terms of not just their handling of this, but handling of future and indeed current investigations. And the ECB, in a sense, said that they said a lot of stuff that they're going to have to be accountable to now. So Tom Harrison said that that the relationship with the Colin Graves Trust, quote, profoundly unhealthy. I think that was Julian Knight who said that, the head of the committee. Harrison recognized that it was a major problem and said it will come under the scope of the governance review of Yorkshire. In response to a question from Clive Efford, MP, who was the bearded one, the one with the white beard, if you're not sure who that was. Is it your
the sponsorship money guy?
Yes, that was.
God,
that got the award for worst question of the day, didn't it?
I think how much are England going to win the Ashes by? I think was probably the worst, the worst substantive question. Perhaps that one. Is it your intention to use major match hosting and funding as leverage over counties? Tom Harrison, categorically yes, and he also, as good as said, as did Mina Botros, the head of legal, that the ECB will no longer wait for counties to do their own investigating.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's good that it only took, huge public outrage and the destruction of a man's career for the ECB to actually think that they might have to do a job and oversight, which they're supposed to do as the regulatory body. Sorry, I was about to swear there. It was just ridiculous. They are supposed to be the overseers of cricket in this country, and they sat there and said, "Oh, but Yorkshire want to do this investigation on their own. We're not going to do anything until they've dragged it out for a year and then been forced to actually release the results."
I think it was Alex Bowden, King Cricket on Twitter, who quote tweeted that and said, "No, Yorkshire are the accused."
Yeah, they sat by and watched Hutton employ his own former law firm. Good jobs for the boys there, considering how long they've managed to drag it out. A lot of billable hours. They were at the test match while Yorkshire entertained members of the committee while they were still investigating.
While the report,
club.
by the way, was probably locked in Mark Arthur's filing cabinet somewhere, because that report had been completed by that point, and the suspicion was at the time that Yorkshire were going to try and slip it out after the end of the test match or something. As it is, they managed to do something even worse than that. And but I'm very well aware that the ECB are very low hanging fruit at this point. So we have to be a little bit careful that we don't just
I don't want to bash them and make them the story, but they have shown a complete lack of oversight, despite saying that is their job and that they are the custodians of the game. And they've basically been shamed into doing their job. As you say, we don't want to make them the story. For me, and I didn't get a chance to ask this on the Spaces yesterday, I see an executive branch at Yorkshire who have been criminal. They have engendered and managed what is legally known as a hostile environment for employees. They've abdicated their duties under whistleblower protection when Azeem alleged racism. He was roundly sacked and everything ignored. I honestly don't know why it hasn't been questioned why these two men aren't being investigated on certainly a criminal sense by Companies House as far as their fit and proper to hold directorships.
There is an employment tribunal that has just been completed. I have to say, I'm not actually entirely sure what the outcome of that has been, and I'm certainly not an employment law expert, but certainly the phrase "constructive dismissal" is flashing in my head.
Exactly.
If not criminal, then certainly severe and civil. I like this comment from Facebook user. Non-execs are supposed to act independent. Head of legal and integrity. What a title. Incidentally, head of communications and diversity is a hell of a dual brief as well that Kate Miller currently holds. There is a danger. There is a serious danger here, it seems to me, that a lot of what the ECB have done that is actually quite good potentially, and I speak particularly of the Inspiring Generations and the South Asian Action Plan, that any of the good of that gets completely lost as basically non-credible because of what they have not done.
And I've been listening to the radio this week, and they've been this story's been hot, hasn't it? And they've been interviewing anybody they can find that has ever liked cricket. And there's a lot of people that have been put off this, as parents are talking about not taking their kids to the Dynamos next week or whatever. So yeah, that's tragic. I mean, Azeem said himself, didn't he? I don't want my son anywhere near cricket. I saw him interviewed today, and he said only if it changes. So he kind of relaxed it a little bit, but he certainly doesn't want his son around cricket as things stand now. And I don't blame him, because at the moment you've got an ECB that is just not taking it seriously. You can't just wear T-shirts. That's not anti-racism. Wearing a T-shirt does not fight racism. It's, I mean, I half expected Tom Harrison to walk in with one of those T-shirts on yesterday, but the only times in the last 3 years since Azeem sat down in front of Martin Moxon and Mark Arthur that cricket has taken him seriously is myself and George Wisden in terms of them interviewing him and actually believing him. When the investigation, was that taking it seriously, or was that just a fudge? Probably just a fudge. But the only time that cricket takes racism
we don't know.
seriously,
we've not read the report yet.
Yeah, the only time cricket takes racism seriously is when somebody is threatened to be embarrassed, or when somebody is being threatened to lose some cash. And that is the only time cricket takes racism seriously. Other than that, they could not give a crap. They've not given a crap about Azeem for 3 years until yesterday. And Mark Arthur and Martin still don't give a crap about him. And that's just disgraceful.
Well, I mean, I think Azeem said this in almost as many words yesterday. There would have had to have been a completely different person, type of people and type of institution to care. And if they were, we wouldn't be where we are now. And Azeem wouldn't have had to have gone through the half a lifetime of horror that he has gone through. But we are not in that position. On the money, incidentally, Lily asked a couple of questions on this, whether any sponsors will actually want to come to Yorkshire or come back to Yorkshire. It's a hell of a hard sell that Lord Patel's got in front of him.
I think this is I've been doing a lot of interviews over the last couple of days, so I've almost got this off pat now. But I think Azeem has given Yorkshire a golden ticket. It doesn't feel like it now, because basically Yorkshire's been kicked in the guts and it's at the bottom of that Grand Canyon that I spoke about earlier. But this is a chance for the game. It's a chance for Yorkshire to actually show. I mean, I've lived here ages now, and Yorkshire's a wonderful county. It's got some fantastic people, some fantastic places, and it's got a wide multicultural population. It's a fantastic chance, this, for Yorkshire to actually show that population that it represents everybody that is interested in cricket and beyond. And they've got to grasp it. They've got to listen to people, take Yorkshire forward. And if they do that, and if they start to show that they're on that road forward and they're actually taking it seriously, and it's going to be a better club than it even was before. Because basically, don't kid yourself. This isn't just the last 3 years. There's been racism in Yorkshire cricket for decades in various guises. This is a chance for a new Yorkshire, or a new start for Yorkshire. And if I was a sponsor, as soon as I see that, I'm thinking that's something I want to buy into. I think sponsors still want to be involved with Yorkshire cricket if it's a good news story, and if they're actually making progress and pushing the club forward and being genuinely inclusive. That is a great news story.
To go back to the word leverage that we mentioned earlier, it strikes me that there is a chance, and Michael Holding has talked about this, about large companies getting involved, and in some ways holding sporting bodies to account in a sort of consumer power sense. There is a chance for a brand of a certain type, at least, or with a certain vision, to try and affect some change with and actually almost take advantage of the fact that money talks in a positive sense.
This is a great opportunity for any company. Look, I'm going to be cynical here, and sort of put my business hat on. Yorkshire are at a low ebb. If you can see that they're on a upward curve, they're starting to embrace the diversity, which could make them strong again. Then you're getting in at the ground level. It is going to be cheap to sponsor Yorkshire if you can see it on an upward curve. If they're embracing everyone, then they're the Mighty Ducks, and everyone wants to sponsor the Mighty Ducks. And if you can get that,
it's probably not the best name for a cricket team, is it?
It worked for Aylesbury. I still remember them, and I've seen them once on Match of the Day about 30 years ago.
I think the sports film analogy we're looking for really is Remember the Titans at this point, bringing together divided communities with charisma.
But you get a 10-year deal with Yorkshire at the moment on absolute bottom dollar, and if
But
they
you've got a chance
continue
to
in that
you've got a
upward
chance to
way,
dictate terms. You've got a chance to dictate terms.
Yeah.
To make your support contingent.
What about this, chaps? The Cricket Badger Podcast Stadium.
oh, I like that.
The Badger Arena.
I could see a Rafiq stand. I might have a cheeky fiver on him for the unsung hero at Sports Personality of the Year, because
various baubles that he will not take right now and shouldn't. We weren't really. Azeem was very conscious of yesterday and very good on, very original on. Actually, this is something I've not heard so much, because we do hear a lot about participation at the grassroots level. We do talk a lot about funneling people in through the bottom of the pathway, whether it's the ACE program, which does work a little bit more multi-level, or Inspiring Generations, or the South Asian Action Plan. Facebook user, this person on Facebook says, grassroots have been a part of an accreditation process that covers racism, run by the ECB and overseen by their own county boards, but they've failed their own tests. And I think that's entirely right. That even the guidelines that are in place, whether they're fit for purpose or not is one question, but who is actually making sure that people follow their own guidelines here? And we've seen within Yorkshire, James, that we saw Roger Pugh, who was a club chair, said some appalling things.
I don't know if you read. Did you read?
And is he now? Am I right in thinking that he's now up for chairmanship of a league?
Yeah, South Yorkshire. No, Barnes. Anyway, I don't want to say just in case I get it wrong.
I believe he was removed as from a leadership position at Barnsley Cricket Club and is now up for chairmanship of the league.
I think he was chairman of the league, and now he's going to Barnsley, isn't he? I think it's that way around, isn't it? But I saw on the Azeem's statement of evidence some implication there for the Yorkshire County Cricket Club that they'd actually sanctioned him putting that comment on the site. So yeah, I definitely got the impression when I was talking to Azeem at various stages during the process that there were people out to try and kind of knock him off his path. And we got a bit paranoid at one stage.
That letter said very much the same sort of thing that Roger Pugh said, the one that got leaked a few weeks ago from, was it 13 or 14 Yorkshire employees, saying, why aren't we bringing Azeem's character into question as a defense mechanism, as if anyone acting like a tool is any kind of justification for racist abuse.
It's like Neil, it's like me saying to you and Nakul, right, I really like Nakul. Nakul's a stand-up bloke. I'm not going to be racist to Nakul, but Neil, you're an absolute... So you can... Yeah. You can't...
It would be naive to think that prioritization doesn't happen. And the way that this works, as my experience and from what I've read, is that if you are somebody who believes unconsciously or consciously that people who do not belong to your dominant group, whether that is men, white people, white men, whether that is straight people, able-bodied people as opposed to disabled people, whatever it might be, cisgender rather than transgender people, you will believe that anyone who is other is lesser and therefore is worthy of less treatment and is essentially a lower class of human. That's how racism develops. That's how anti-black and anti-brown racism develops in the West, to essentially to justify the slave trade. Read Michael Holding's book. He does it. He says that much. He outlines that much better than I've just done it.
Yes, a good point.
But what you do then is that you make exceptions. So and so is an honorary not you, but those lot. Not you, but not you, mate. You're all right. That there's not a person of color in the country who hasn't heard that at least once.
The Uncle Tom figure.
Or not even that, but I'm talking from, bloke in pub or whoever it might be, or senior figure at in the club's second team when you're a young player in the thirds or whatever or whatever it might be, taxi driver.
You're all right, but it's the other ones.
CEO, yeah. And what they're doing is essentially bracketing you as an honorary white person or an honorary one of them.
So if you're Azeem and you start having a couple of beers with Gary Balance and you kind of you're staying out a bit later and all the rest of it, and you're fitting into the team's mentality, that means that you're okay.
Yeah, or if you don't say
you're trying to tell yourself and you are. Yeah.
Or if you don't rock the boat, or if you nervously laugh along with the, even if it doesn't necessarily directly affect you, like if you nervously laugh along or don't call out the general casual homophobia or general casual misogyny that you will hear at most cricket clubs, let's be honest, or football clubs or whatever it might be, or then if you start rocking the boat, as they would see it, if you start standing up for yourself or for other people, then you're seen as a problem. And so we've seen this time and time again.
If you're a 15-year-old lad at Barnsley Cricket Club and somebody's pouring red wine down your throat
in a moving car,
and you start to basically complain about that, that's probably out of order, isn't it? You shouldn't really complain in that situation. That was the worst part of yesterday, I thought. I mean, a 15-year-old kid of Muslim faith getting red wine poured down his throat is absolutely horrendous.
It's very interesting that the point at which people start to take other people's religious beliefs seriously. So that's okay, but the fact that Azeem Rafiq chose to drink alcohol to fit in when he's a Muslim is somehow that makes him a worse human being. The mental gymnastics to care about the tenets of Islam, quite apart from the fact that no matter who, it sounds astonishingly naive in the context of what we've just been talking about, but if you are holding someone down and pouring alcohol down their throat, they probably don't want to drink it.
Somebody said to me yesterday, Nakul, a friend of mine who is a recovering alcoholic and has, doing rather well, and he said, I can't imagine if I'd gone to a local club or something and they held me down and poured wine down my neck after all I've been through. And there's no real difference there, is there? It's against your will on something you really don't want to intake. I mean, it's just wrong.
Or even if you didn't want to drink. I mean, there's that. I mean, that's a more extreme example, but the pressure to drink if you don't want to drink is a whole separate conversation about how British men socialize. Another Facebook user is quite right. Steve, thank you, Steve. It's worrying that those 13 to 40s employees are still at the club. Will make any lasting change much more difficult. Yeah, James, go ahead.
Because I worked there and I know how that club runs. This investigation, and I know people, when I say stuff like this, sort of say, well, you don't. This investigation has been dealt with by the top deck. Yeah, HR, CEO, Director of Cricket, Chairman. Most of those members of staff of that club did not have any clue what was going on. And as I say, you don't walk around that club hearing the P word to your right and then the N word to your left and then somebody being assaulted further down the street. It's, generally speaking, day to day, if you're just going to work and you get on with it, you would not know anything was strange. So I think the 13, 14 employees, I still know people at the club. There are some very, very hard-working, good people at Yorkshire County Cricket Club that shouldn't be tarnished with the rest of everything that's going on at the moment. And I can only think that the 13 or 14 employees have only been hearing one side of this story and are worried for their jobs. They've got kids, they've got mouths to feed, they've got everything else going on. It doesn't make it right, but it's kind of, people are human. And I wouldn't necessarily. I don't agree that they've done what they've done and how it was phrased, but I don't want to see everybody at Yorkshire tarnished with everything that's gone on there.
But it's very difficult for that not to be the case, given the magnitude of what's happened, and given the. But given the either lack of leadership or the hostile.
If your bosses are telling you that Azeem's the problem here. Look at Martin, he's going off sick, it's horrible. And look at Mark, he's probably going to have to resign and Mark's done nothing wrong. You can frame it so that the staff feel sorry for the club rather than the individual who they haven't seen for years on end. So I'm not necessarily condoning what they've done, But I can understand how that would happen at Yorkshire because the culture is such that it would actually drive people to do that.
I do understand how that. I understand how that comes about. I think it's very difficult for me to want to cut anybody any slack right now, given what has happened.
I agree, and I was really disappointed when I saw that 14 people had signed that letter, and I know Azeem was absolutely gutted by it. But I just think it's dangerous for people on the outside who have never worked inside the club, or to actually just basically think that everybody inside that club is a racist bigot, and none of them should stay there, because that is far from true.
It was quite scary, though.
If only practically. Sorry, go ahead.
It was quite scary, though. As you said, they're only getting partial truths, but the tone and the content of that letter speak towards the fiefdom that Arthur and Moxon had, where basically they ran everything and they basically controlled the information.
It underlines the culture, Neil, doesn't it? It underlines the culture that's created from the top. Yeah, totally agree.
There are people who have very entirely bought into, or have felt themselves, or have been pressurable into, buying into that culture, which I suspect will come under the heading of white rose values. In a few pieces.
The thing is, then, Nakul, when it's the culture of the organisation and it's been allowed to grow and it's strong enough to actually pervade through the kind of very skeleton of the organisation, you work there for a bit, you become that, don't you?
But it can be changed. It can be changed under Gillespie. Gillespie changed it. You said you didn't have that issue. From anecdotes that I've heard, people can stand up and change things. I heard an anecdote of Rob Key doing that at Kent. That's what it takes
that's exactly what it needs as well. And I don't think it takes too much. I don't think it takes too much at that club. If you take the top deck out and you basically go in and you say, this is not acceptable. And if you hear anybody saying anything remotely racist or homophobic or whatever, tell them to stop. And if they don't stop, report it. And you basically, you lay your cards on the table, don't you? And say, this is not going to continue. This is not tolerated. And as soon as you start doing that and people see the actions taken about anybody that transgresses, you end that culture. It goes.
It can start to go, and you can start to replace it with something healthier.
Which is
you're always going to have
those guys. That's progress.
Yeah, you're always going to have the guys who make racist comments. What you can do is make that environment inhospitable and for those kind of comments, and you can make it welcoming for people who are in the minority.
This is an interesting point, and Mudassar Nawaz on YouTube says that what's missed is the education to what's going on. Instead, it's make people feel bad and guilty, or just completely deny it. But I think that there's a lot in what you say, Neil, that it's socially acceptable. It has been revealed in a parliamentary inquiry and in great detail that at Yorkshire, at some other clubs as well, we know about some of them. We don't yet know about some more. That it has been socially acceptable to be racist. That it has been socially unacceptable to call out racism. Until you start to change that, you have no hope of changing anything.
You can't change individuals.
People aren't embarrassed to be. I mean, just look at the. I suspect some of the voting records of some of the MPs on the panel yesterday. Certainly look at what the top levels of the government are doing, with Preeti Patel announcing today that the government is trying to push through legislation to retroactively strip people of their citizenship, almost and claim national security as a defense, or claim need without giving notice. Look at Boris Johnson's entire career. It's not socially. It's racism's not socially unacceptable or embarrassing anymore.
I
If it ever
firmly
was.
believe,
If it ever was.
I firmly believe as well that there is nobody on this planet that actually thinks when they say the P word or the N word, or they think they're actually doing something that's clever or right. And if they get noticed doing it, that they can defend it. That, I mean, there must be some far right people that think that, but in a workplace like Yorkshire, and you're in a dressing room with teammates who are supposed to be your colleagues and friends, if you call somebody the P word, you can't possibly inside your head think that's actually a great thing to say.
I think you can, or at least you certainly don't. I think you can, and I think you can you could think that it's not a hurtful thing to say.
Well, if you get called out for
many...
it, Nakul, if you get called out for Nakul, there's nobody I know that would actually say, "Well, I justify saying that."
Let's call it out and find out, shall we?
I think what Twitter's shown is you're getting a lot of people using the description excuse, which is quite frankly effing ridiculous. Considering now,
so this is
Paki means Pakistani.
So George DeBell did a really good answer to that. He told a story where he was in a press box and somebody was using the P word, and he said, he basically said, "Can you not use that word, please, in the press box?" And the bloke said, "It's just an abbreviation." He says, "Well, mate, we're here for 7 hours. You can say the whole word, can't you?"
I've been called I'm of Indian descent. I don't think people ever bother to actually drill down into which part of the subcontinent you come from.
Well, or in Lily's case earlier, just being vaguely brown. Yes. And yes, calling bigots stupid is low hanging fruit, but but why not? But yes, the only time that the P word has been used at me, I think pointing out that my parents are both from India would not have helped the situation, particularly. I did once manage to diffuse a racist situation by when someone told me to go back home. I said, I don't want to go back to Hull. But that could equally have got me beaten up. But I think that I wanted to mention this earlier is that we talked a little bit about and this came up in the Twitter space that James and I and Neil were on yesterday. Proximity to whiteness. Azeem Rafiq, as a practicing Muslim, as a man with a beard, as somebody who was born in Pakistan and moved to the UK relatively late in childhood, I have been astonishingly lucky in my life that I've had very little direct racism. A fair amount of the where are you really from and the no, not you, the other ones type. I speak like this. I've lived in England all my life. I'm relatively light-skinned. I'm Indian. My parents are Hindu and Sikh rather than Muslim. Although again, bigots don't care. But that's how it is. I dress a certain way. I can talk about football. I can talk about whatever it might be. I can pass essentially. And a lot of people don't have that luxury, and I've heard a few people say, this is nothing to do with cricket. This is or that you should somehow keep people who tell you to keep the two separate. Other people don't have the luxury of being. Azeem Rafiq doesn't have the luxury of being apolitical or to separate sport and society. I don't think I do either, and I don't think the rest of us should act like we do. I
think Azeem over the last 3 years wished he had, but he's been forced down a certain road, isn't he?
Yeah, it's amazing when people say keep the politics out of sports. They're not talking about Basil D'Oliveira, apparently. That was particularly amusing with the Quinton de Kock thing. They're not talking about Jesse Owens, not talking about sport, which has been introduced to the world via colonialism. Um, the two are inextricably intertwined.
They're not talking about women not being allowed into the Lord's Pavilion until the late 90s.
Well, were women actually? Was it legal for women to play cricket throughout the years? I know for football, wasn't it illegal until like 1980?
The FA banned organised women's football through the 20th century. No, it was very legal, and in fact, there was more women's Test cricket played then than there is now. But that's an entirely separate conversation. I'm gonna put this comment up from another Facebook user with the proviso well, actually, Yorkshire have been a conveyor belt because they have such a huge pool of talent. They don't give a crap about people. They just exit with the form at the time and wash their hands when people are injured or struggling, and they can move on. The smaller counties value talent and help through thick and thin. Not entirely sure that's true, and I'm sure we may find out some examples of that. Steve Oldham and Doug Paget were probably worse than the current crop. There's a little bit in that. But it's also worth pointing out that Azeem Rafiq was a very strong performer for Yorkshire in T20 cricket during his second spell. That didn't help either. This has been
Azeem was a very good player. I mean, I started at the club, and Joe Root, Azeem, Gary Ballance, and Johnny Bairstow, all kind of similar age. And they were all coming through the academy. That academy team won the Yorkshire title that year against, the men's teams of the big teams around the county. And I like to think I know a little bit about cricket. And I said, all four of those are going to play for England. There's no doubt in my mind that Joe Root, who absolutely superb, Johnny Bairstow, obviously proven, Gary Ballance played for England and probably should have played more. And Azeem should have played for England. He had enough talent to play for England. There was no doubt about it. He obviously went through his struggles at the end of his first tenure. I was really pleased yesterday that the kind of negative comments you get were always, why did he go back for the second stint then if he was so badly treated? And he kind of explained that yesterday and explained that away, that he was in denial and he hated himself. He hates himself for that now, and he obviously went back the second time and it hurt him more, and he stood up more. And it was only when he stood up that he was suddenly became from being a important player and an important cog in the squad, he became a problem, and the exit door was suddenly part of the equation as well. So that kind of tells its tale. But he was a really good player, Azeem, and I mean, he's still only 30. I mean, he's a spinner. He could have another 8 years left in him if he could. If somebody gave him a chance. But he's a level 4 coach as well. I know we've talked about future career prospects and stuff, and he'd love to get into coaching. I think if he can stomach going back into cricket, and if he thinks cricket's going to accept him, because I think there's a little bit of a psychological thing there in his head at the moment, but. I'd love to see him go back into cricket because he's got a lot to offer cricket. And I think what's scary with this over the last 16 months is I know George has had threats to him. I've had threats to me. Azeem's definitely had threats to him. I know I've been taken off all of the lists at Yorkshire. I wasn't on their media list. I wasn't on anything that they had. I think if they got their way and Azeem had been shoved to one side and made to disappear, he wouldn't have ever seen cricket again, because cricket would have just turned its back on him, because he would still be seen as the problem, and I probably would never have been able to go to Headingley again. So that kind of tells you the kind of mentality. This is the problem. Let's kick them out. We can move on without them. So I genuinely, yesterday, looking at Azeem doing what he did, I had tears in my eyes at some stages through his testimony, because I've heard all of that before. It wasn't like new to me, but just obviously the kind of powerful nature of that environment and watching it and knowing the significance of it, feeling a little bit nervous for him at the start and everything like that. It got to me a little bit, and really, I was really proud of him yesterday. But I do worry what would have happened to both him and I, to a degree. not so bothered about me because I've got other irons in the fire. I can go off and do tennis commentary or something else. But I do wonder what would have happened to him if, or certainly the game would have closed its doors on him if he hadn't got his moment yesterday, or the P word being banter hadn't suddenly lit the touch paper, and everybody suddenly started to kind of climb on this bandwagon that rolled into Westminster yesterday. You do wonder what the consequences would have been.
You do wonder whether the game would have taken an opportunity that has been now thrust upon it to change. And God knows we're not even at the beginning of the beginning, let alone the middle or the end of that process.
Cricket in Yorkshire have got two choices here, Nakul. They either take this seriously and genuinely believe this is an opportunity, genuinely take this baton and kind of run with it and take it to the horizon and beyond, and make cricket perfectly inclusive and as perfect as you can make anything. Or they kind of just could go back to wearing T-shirts and ticking boxes, go through the motions, think they're doing enough. But I tell you what, as well, I think I know George is, I know I am, I know Azeem is, and I'm sure other people are too now, after hearing his testimony yesterday. There is a lot more people out there waiting to hold people to account now than there were when we started this 16 months ago.
Well, this isn't something new, is it? Specifically with Yorkshire. Yeah, and I don't want to point Yorkshire out, but I think they have to, Neil, because they are rather in the.
You're not saying anything worse than they can possibly have said about themselves.
They've been accused of institutional racism several points throughout their career. Imran Khan, I believe, a member of Parliament in the 90s, as well, about the lack of Asian players.
I think it was 2004.
And in the 80s.
Terry Rooney. 2004, Terry
Rooney. It goes further back than that. The Telegraph writer Jim White was saying yesterday that he wrote a piece in 1990. Incidentally, before Azeem was, he wrote a piece before Azeem was born, pointing out the blocking of South Asian players coming up through Yorkshire.
The Terry Rooney thing's quite revealing, because the club came out quite strongly against that. We are not institutionally racist. How dare you? Kind of language. And within a few years, they had Ismail Darwood in the side. Asmal Shazad came through. Adil Rashid came through. Obviously, Moin Ashraf, Azeem, and all of a sudden there was, plenty of brown faces on the squad photograph. Kind of the kind of hubbub from that parliamentary kind of complaint that Yorkshire was institutionally racist then kind of died down a little bit. People forgot about it because there were Asian people playing for Yorkshire. You look at the squad now. There's Adil Rashid, and that's only when Yorkshire playing T20 cricket.
And he's the only non-white member of staff playing or coaching or support.
The physios. Right. I'm not sure where Kumar comes from, but he's okay. He's a person of colour. But there's two.
But one of the stories, even in the 80s, what I was reading about was, it wasn't even down to quality, like in terms of the conveyor belt thing. When opposing teams came, the two that I read about, which amazed me, were Sid Lawrence and then Viv Richards, the best player in the world at the time, got horrendously abused, and the chairman defended Yorkshire about that. As well.
Somebody said that to me the other day. It was when Joel Garner and Viv Richards walked out onto Headingley. That's when this racism thing started. And the chairman, I can't remember his name, and that's terrible of me. But he basically, there were complaints came into him about it, and he did nothing. And then somebody I spoke to, literally 24 hours later, said, "Oh no, it wasn't then. It was about 10 years before then." And then literally I spoke to somebody about 24 hours later than that, and they said, "No, it was 24 hours." It's been going on for ages. Instances of racism in the crowd, instances of people complaining about it, instances of the club doing nothing about it. If the club had actually stuck its money where its mouth is and stopped ticking boxes and actually said, "No, this isn't acceptable. You don't come back in this ground anymore," we wouldn't be talking about this today, because there would be that culture.
The first time I ever went to a Yorkshire game, it was a T20 game when Zahir Khan was the opposition overseas player, and I was sat, because it's where we could get tickets, in the Western Terrace, and there were racist chants against Zahir Khan, who was fielding on the boundary in front of the Western Terrace the entire game. Imagine how I felt as a 14-year-old brown boy.
It's horrendous. It's horrendous, and nobody does anything about it. I mean, in the report, Claire, who's regular on the Cricket Badger podcast, had complained about a member of the crowd hurling racist abuse around, and basically nobody did anything about that either, did they? Until the investigation.
Not just a member of the crowd, Harry Brooks' grandfather, so a family member of one of the up and coming stars of the club, and it's very interesting actually.
Does that make it any better or worse? I don't think it makes any difference, does it? It's still a bloke hurling abuse, isn't it?
They've got more direct leverage or more direct contact, at least, to that person. It doesn't appear as though Harry Brook was asked to go and have a word with him. And there are a number. Are we very, very interested next season to hear how there are a lot of players who have been thought of as the very solid core of Yorkshire through the 2010s. Steve Patterson, to not just the people who have been accused of really egregious stuff like Andrew Gale and Gary Ballance, but Tim Bresnan, Rich Pyra, Steve Patterson, all of whom would have been thought of as solid club people, good blokes, as it were. I will be very, very interested to hear how county commentators and county writers talk about those people next season, knowing what we know about them now.
Nakul, we can't get to that far because basically I've been told that I'm responsible for the fact that these guys can't put tracksuits on and walk through Headingley because I've disgraced the club. I was told by Chris Waters on Twitter that I'm an embarrassment to the club because of what I've done. Chris Waters on Twitter, the Yorkshire Post journalist, accused Azeem Rafiq of having a screw loose, bearing in mind that Azeem had his mental health issues not long before. Chris Waters of the Yorkshire Post, who wrote on behalf of the club effectively for 16 months and didn't cover this story at all impartially or two-sided. Some of the stuff I've been sent by people over the last 16 months, I am the problem here. I am the problem because I am standing up against a club that's shown racism. I'm sorry, but I can look myself in the mirror after the last 16 months. Can everybody that supports Yorkshire? I don't think so.
A disgrace to the club you don't work for anymore.
I'm not a disgrace, Nakul. I was an embarrassment, not a disgrace. Thank you. I'm not. Don't downgrade me.
Fine. There is a case, Chris Waters at the Yorkshire Post, of local journalist overboard, or very much on board. Actually, I think was probably more of the problem. That
he's an excellent writer, Chris. I'm not going to slag him off for his writing. He's excellent, but I think the way he's actually done his job over the last 16 months isn't good. And I think telling me that I'm an embarrassment is a little bit pot and kettle and black.
There hasn't been that professional skepticism.
As someone who's just come out of a journalism course, the fact that somebody would use their journalistic training to be a mouthpiece to that extent really does.
There's nothing wrong with forging relationships with the club and making contacts and having a good relationship and and being close to somebody. That's not a problem at all. But when was the phone call made to Azeem to say, mate, let's hear your side of this? Never.
There's it's very much a Kelvin McKenzie method of an excuse, isn't it, of just automatically believing what you've been told, basically becoming a shill. McKenzie obviously being one of the people who's backed Michael Vaughan in the last couple of days. But where's the journalistic skepticism and integrity to corroborate, to check, to actually look at something and think, does that smell right? It does seem that it's just been the party line coming from the Yorkshire Post, certainly in the articles that I've seen online.
I mean, there's a lot of journalists have said to me last few days, well done. And to be honest, I don't feel like it's well done. People saying congratulations, well done. And I'm thinking it's my club that's on its knees at the minute. I've got very mixed feelings at the moment about how this has turned out. But I'm very proud of Azeem for doing what he's done and getting this far. It doesn't feel like well done because I've effectively kicked my my club in the guts and it's on its knees in front of the world at the moment, which isn't a pleasant feeling. But an awful lot have also said, I either didn't notice this story or I should have written about it earlier. And yeah, you should, because this has been a story for 16 months and it shouldn't have been just the last 2 months or 6 weeks or 4 weeks that people started showing an interest.
I'm just going to read something that Chris Waters wrote, and the fact that it is Chris Waters, whatever, but it is a senior figure, the main cricket writer at the main paper in the county. Incidentally, their editor has also not covered himself in glory in his. He did write a comment piece about it not very long ago, but has also enabled.
In fairness to him, though, they might have been belatedly, but they have changed tack on the way they've covered the story now.
But here is from Chris Waters' story about Mark Arthur leaving Yorkshire. Martin Moxon, the Yorkshire director of cricket, is off with a stress-related illness, his own future in doubt, having been practically left broken by the strain of the past year. Andrew Gale, the first team coach, is currently suspended while the club investigates a tweet from 11 years ago that resurfaced last Friday. Gale admitted to using the Y word in relation to a football chant during a conversational exchange, unaware that it was an offensive term for a Jewish person, and immediately deleted the post when the meaning was explained to him. It appears that someone took a screenshot of the tweet, waited for 11 years, and then threw it on the bushfire.
Wow.
Guess where Chris Waters stands from whose corner he's fighting.
It's hard to really know what to say to something which is so obviously partisan. I think we've spoken before, and I've been quite naive in what I believe the role of a journalist is. But that's you're a mouthpiece when you write stuff like that. That's horrendous. Although I've seen similar from respected journalists when the Ollie Robinson case came up earlier this year about how adults should not be accountable for their own actions because it was a while ago.
And I do wonder about two things that I was reminded of when reading Azeem's written testimony. Particularly the tone of the national conversation when Adil Rashid missed Yorkshire's last game of the 2016 season. Because the story that came out immediately at that time was that he had chosen to miss that game for the reasons given and that Andrew Gale was unhappy about it. No mention at all was made of the fact that Adil Rashid's grandmother was extremely ill and he was about to go on tour and might not be able to see her and was seriously worried that she might die. He was not able to put out a statement himself. He was not able to give his own side of the story until much later, by which time Yorkshire's side of the story had already run around the world and the national cricket press ran with Yorkshire's side of the story. And then we have also Azeem Rafiq not being able to, his statement about the loss of his son, the loss of his stillborn son, being pulled from the website before it went live. But I want to go back to that. I'm aware this has been going on for a little while, and this will be the final point before we let everybody go. Thank you very much for your comments and your time. These are I've been involved in a lot of conversations and podcasts that would have gone on for a lot longer, but we have to have some level of structure. I
think Neil's hungry.
Always.
It'll be very, very interesting to see if the journalistic profession, something I'm trying to break into, so cards on the table there, but whether the cricket media has learned anything the next time something like this happens, the next time a player
I think they have.
The next time that this happens, something like this.
I think they have, and I think it's happened. That said, there's a familiar partner in this. It was when you noted that Adil Rashid. The story was that Adil had chosen not to play, and it was the word "chosen" because that is exactly what Joe Root said about Moeen Ali earlier this year, in terms of taking his previously agreed scheduled break during the 3-month tour of the subcontinent. The story that came out was that Moeen had chosen not to play for England, and it was George Dobell yet again who initially broke that was complete falsehood. And Joe, to his credit, did apologise to Moeen by all accounts, and Chris Silverwood explained to the press. So there was an about face when that happened again this time, but it did take someone of the strength of George Dobell to highlight it first.
And it's a little different as well because Joe Root and Chris Silverwood both mentioned that was a verbal misstep rather than a very deliberate choice, as it seems, on the part of Yorkshire to put it out that Adil Rashid had let the county down. James,
just on George, I think it's worth noting. I mean, the reason I after I spoke to Azeem on the podcast, believed in his story, believed in him, tried to get some traction, tried to get it on Twitter, tried to get some answers from Yorkshire. Reason I phoned George and chose George was because A, I think he's the best cricket journalist there is. And B, he's got a massive heart and he cares about people. And he has been absolutely gigantic over the last 15, 16 months since he wrote that first piece. Spoken to him a few times. He's been in regular contact with Azeem, as have I. And without George, this would not have got anywhere near as far as the House of Commons and the Select Committee yesterday, because he has that audience and people actually respect what he writes, and he writes it really well. So George needs to take a huge amount of credit out of the last 16 months.
I understand that George and Azeem spent some time together yesterday after the DCMS hearing, and we are very
some food, Neil. They went for food. So you're hungry, aren't you?
We are very, very lucky that Azeem did eventually find some people in his corner. And now that we all are, we have to keep backing up people like Azeem, Rafiq. And there are whistleblowing processes ongoing. I know at Essex, I know at Worcestershire, I know at Surrey, and Yorkshire now, and a few other counties as well. When, and I'm saying when, not if, more people come forward, we know what to do. Thank you, everybody, for joining on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. Thank you for those of you who shared some very personal stuff. Particularly you, Lily. We thank you all for your time. And James,
can I say one last thing before we go, Nakul? Because you've got the controls today. But just over the last 16 months, there have been some nasty comments, there have been some threats, there have been some idiots out there, and there still are. But there have also been some very good people on Twitter and on social media that have supported Azeem all the way through. And he has noticed them, and he has been very grateful for them, and so have I. So whether you listened to the podcast 16 months ago or whether you've kind of caught up as we've gone through, thank you very much for the support over the last 16 months.
And on that, we will say goodbye. This almost certainly will not be the last time that we talk about this on this or any of our other of our other platforms. But stay strong, Azeem, if you do happen to hear this, and take care, everybody.